Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of the Daily Bullet, where we talk to people that are making a difference in Second Amendment rights. Joining us today, Steve Felano. Steve is the head of 2A NYS and made a big splash in the Buffalo, New York area when he announced that he's running for the Erie County Sheriff. Steve, thanks for joining us today, man.
Paul, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
So, you're the head of a Second Amendment advocacy group there in New York. And what in the world possessed you to want to run for sheriff, man?
Sure. Well, it's two things. One, this whole approach running for sheriff is informed by my career in Second Amendment advocacy. For the past several years, my group has been focused on nullifying, reversing various civilian disarmament edicts in New York State, such as the SAFE Act, the pistol permitting regime, the red flag law. And I've come to realize that's never going to happen by, with, and through the legislature. The pathway to do that through the court system is fairly limited as well, especially as state courts are shut down during the pandemic. So I figured at this stage it makes the most strategic sense to go right to the source, which is the enforcement arm of these gun control edicts, to run for sheriff and simply issue a very direct, explicit policy that my office won't be enforcing these edicts, and the message has been very well received over the past 24 hours.
Well, very cool. Now, you were brought to my attention by the Buffalo newspaper, and the headline is what really caught my eye. In the headline, they're saying you're promising you're not going to enforce any unconstitutional laws. You want to expand on that a little bit?
Certainly. So I'm applying a simple test here when I'm talking about my non-enforcement policies, and it's just a question of whether or not the Constitution explicitly provides for these types of laws to be forced on the public. All throughout this pandemic, unconstitutional compulsion has been on full display all across. One, the New York State Constitution does not provide for the legislature to outsource its authority to one person, Andrew Cuomo. There's a myriad of reasons why the SAFE Act, the red flag law, pistol permitting system, why all those things are unconstitutional. But at a basic level, really what my focus is on in this campaign is not what the sheriff's office is going to do to you, is going to make you do on behalf of left progressives in Albany. It's what is the sheriff going to refuse to do to safeguard your civil rights against infringement from really what is the biggest criminal enterprise in the whole state, which is state government itself. I made the analogy yesterday in my campaign announcement. New York State government, through the criminal nature of the people who run it, really, they've stolen more from you and your family and caused more violence in Erie County through their misguided policies than any common criminal has or ever will, or any inner city gang has or ever will. So that's really the criminal element that we should be focusing on.
Well, and you went farther than that. You'd said that as part of the powers of sheriff, you have the ability to, engender or enable a grand jury to investigate what is going on in Albany. Could you? That's
right. It's maybe a lesser known fact amongst the general public, and I think it's a well-hidden secret amongst district attorneys and those in the government side of law enforcement, that New York state law provides for the sheriff to impanel grand juries and special grand juries as well. And they have broad powers to investigate official misconduct. I've had questions come back to me since announcing yesterday, how is it possible that a grand jury in Erie County could investigate the governor in Albany? Well, there's no specific language in the statute that forbids a grand jury impaneled in Erie County from investigating official misconduct at the Capitol, because it impacts the entire state. So this hasn't been tried before by any sheriffs. The power does exist for the sheriff to do this, and I'd like to push it as far as I possibly can. So that's a substantial focal point of my campaign, of my policy that I'm running on, and I think a lot of good can be done through impaneling a grand jury to do these types of investigations into officials, not only in Erie County, but all across the state.
All right, one other point that I want to get to from your release yesterday, and I think this is very encouraging. Another thing you say you do not want the sheriff's office to do is to fund county government through traffic fines. And is that something you're feeling is happening right now?
Oh, absolutely. We're actually seeing some positive movement in that direction as far as not enforcing these technical victimless traffic violations that the city of Buffalo is famous for, setting up traffic cameras all throughout downtown Buffalo and capturing people in these speed traps at all times of day and school zones, even when school is not in session. There's been a lot of noise made about this because of the pandemic and all the shutdowns. People, frankly, don't have the money to pay these fines, whereas in the past they used to, and just out of convenience they would pay them. The city of Buffalo and Erie County government in general has been far more aggressive at levying these fines and collecting them because, as we all know, New York State government is bankrupt, and county governments borrow heavily from state coffers, so they're bankrupt. So yes, I mean, that's a big issue that I'm running on. It's a huge point of stress, not only for Second Amendment advocates, but working families all across the county, that they shouldn't be ensnared in these speed traps just to fund the reckless spending of progressives. Progressives need to develop and enact responsible budgets that don't depend on pickpocketing working families all across the county.
All right. The next area, I would be really not doing my job very well if I didn't bring this up, and that is you have no law enforcement experience at all. I need to ask, what makes you think you're qualified for being a county sheriff?
Sure. Yeah, I don't have law enforcement experience in the traditional sense, right? So you're going to hear, and if you've been following this campaign, you have heard a range of individuals with 25, 30, maybe 40 years of experience working in law enforcement agencies that have the entire time taken orders and enforced all the orders imposed on them and New York State residents by state government and by extension through Erie County government. I'm a law enforcement outsider. This is a law enforcement outsider campaign. I'm able to talk about these types of things in my campaign because I don't have the golden handcuffs of the government pension and the government paycheck. If any other sheriff stood up here right now and said the types of things that I was saying, or that I am saying, his paycheck would stop coming in, and there'd be a very real possibility of him not receiving his pension payments when it comes time to retire. So I view this as a big strength. I can take a fresh view at what is happening here. I'd say my law enforcement expertise primarily lies in seeing how the court system in this state and federally has abused the civil rights of citizens. And I am focused as sheriff, when I become sheriff, on protecting people's individual rights, not allowing the government to run roughshod over those rights. So it's definitely a role reversal, I think, in the minds of many members of the public, but it's one that needs to happen. So I would say that the fact that I'm not beholden to government payment for my living is a strength, because I can take these aggressive stances and at least be secure in the fact that the government can't take my living away from me.
Sure. So I want to switch gears just a little bit, and I want to talk about everybody who I know that resides in New York or travels through New York. It's one of the banes of their existence, and that's the New York SAFE Act.
Right.
You've stated as part of unconstitutional law you're going to not enforce the SAFE Act. What in the SAFE Act is, in your mind, makes it unconstitutional?
Oh, man, there's so much there. My organization, 2A NYS, we worked with an attorney named Jim Ostrowski, who's actually the only attorney who successfully reversed a SAFE Act conviction. And it was the state's first SAFE Act conviction against Ben Wassel in Chautauqua County, just a few counties over from where I am right now. There's so much. I mean, the blanket ban on entire classes of firearms, the blanket ban on magazine capacity, the definition of what qualifies as an assault weapon, which came up in the Wassel case. Mr. Wassel actually almost was acquitted because the jury involved in the case didn't want to convict him because they didn't understand the definition of an assault weapon in the SAFE Act as a law. When they asked the judge to explain it, he hemmed and hawed and eventually told them he couldn't tell them, but that the gun that Mr. Wassel had was illegal, so they simply had to convict. So there are just so many issues here If the average citizen can't understand the law, then everyone's guilty. So I'd say those are three big issues right there.
All right. Now, since you announced yesterday, I think you were one of the first people to announce. And then since you've announced, man, people have been coming out of the woodwork to announce. And you mentioned earlier, they're all mentioning they've got oodles and oodles and oodles of law enforcement experience. It can't be coincidental that you make a splash and everybody else jumps in.
Right. Yeah. To my knowledge, there is one other candidate that had announced prior to my announcement yesterday. And yeah, exactly. I mean, one of the goals of my campaign is to influence the Republican and the Democrat Party on issues of civil rights, of specifically protecting individual rights. I did want to influence and hurry along folks who maybe weren't ready to announce, because now I can push this question, a very direct question. Hey, my campaign is all about not enforcing these unconstitutional laws. The SAFE Act, the pistol permitting regime, red flag law, all the COVID shutdowns. Are you going to enforce them? If not, why not? If so, then why are you going to do that? Because if you look at all the announcement, press releases and videos on the Republican side, what do they say? I'm a law and order candidate. I support the Constitution. I believe in your civil rights and I won't infringe on them. I'll never take away your guns. I believe in the Second Amendment. And then in the same breath, some of them are saying, but I believe in dutifully and justly enforcing all laws. In New York State, those are mutually exclusive positions. You can't fairly and in a safe way enforce a range of these laws and still respect people's civil rights. So it gives me a chance to kind of catch everybody flat-footed, really make maximal Second Amendment civil rights and freedom from these lockdowns a focal point of the campaign, and really put it on the record where everybody stands. And I'm hoping that this continues throughout the campaign. I'm going to be aggressively pursuing all the other candidates to give the public answers on those two issues and more.
So, and I want to just be clear about this. This isn't a demonstration candidacy. This isn't a joke candidacy. This isn't you just trying to make a statement. You're actually running, and you are very much hoping to get elected as sheriff.
That's right. I mean, this is a serious campaign, and in a lot of ways, it's organic to what I've been hearing from law enforcement. What I've tried to do over the past year, ever since transitioning my organization statewide, we used to be 2AWNY, focusing on the counties that make up Western New York. We had a lot of interest statewide, so I expanded it to all 62 counties in the state. I wanted to do as many ride-alongs as I possibly could with patrol officers, the guys in the patrol cars on the streets, and hear about what they wanted to see change in terms of what they have to enforce, how they're treated by the public, how they're treated by police leadership, by elected officials. This policy platform is really what I heard from officers. They don't want to enforce the SAFE Act. They don't want to enforce the pistol permitting regime. They don't want to be, issuing red flag orders to people and going into their homes. They really do not want to be shutting down businesses under these coronavirus pandemic lockdown measures. So all I'm trying to do here is find statutes that provide me with the authority as sheriff to give these officers what they want, and likewise empower them to protect the civil rights of their citizens. Because right now, the truth is, when an officer enforces a large range of laws on the books in New York State, it's not necessarily for citizens' safety or their own good. They're really enforcing an ideology. And that's really the guiding principle of leftism in New York State. A great example, just yesterday when I announced, the governor signed a law into place unilaterally, because the legislature has abdicated its authority to him in total. He signed a law into place that makes it illegal to sell Confederate flags on state property. And you can say what you will about what you believe the Confederate flag means or doesn't mean. The fact of the matter is it's free speech. Mm-hmm. So, that is a clear example of a leftist ideology guiding the law and guiding policy. And that's exactly the type of thing that I would not enforce and would stop. Another law that the governor signed into practice yesterday is the fact that immigration and customs enforcement officers are not going to be allowed in state courts anymore. And I'd like to point out that when people say to me, you're picking and choosing what laws you want to enforce, the governor is picking and choosing what federal law enforcement agencies he's going to allow to operate within the state. He's picking and choosing what federal immigration laws he's going to allow to be enforced in this state. So I'm not doing anything different from what the governor is doing. In fact, I'm borrowing a page out of his playbook and just repurposing it for the purposes of expanding Second Amendment civil rights. So yes, it's a very real campaign. And, I think it's a forward-thinking campaign, and it's the direction that many more sheriffs across the state should take to be forward-thinking on what we're going to see from the Biden regime that's incoming.
Very cool. We are running up on the time we have for today, but if there's one thing I know from interviewing candidates and representatives, senators, all throughout the country, campaigns don't run for free. And they cost a lot of real money to run. If somebody's hearing you, they like the message, they want to support you, how can they do that?
Sure. The best way to do that is to go to my website. It's my last name, Felano, Felano, wins, W-I-N-S, like wins the election. Felano wins, FELANOWINS.com. You can donate securely to the campaign there. I'd recommend you sign up for email updates as well, given the prevalence of deplatforming in the current day and age. And we certainly appreciate here at the campaign the support of everybody out there.
Well, Steve, I want to thank you very much for joining us today.
Appreciate it, Paul. Thank you.
Folks, we're going to go ahead and set this one aside then. Join us tomorrow when we were going to be releasing another one of these, and subscribe if you would. And when you do, hit the notification bell so you know when we release another one. We'll talk to you tomorrow.